In today's video, I'm going to be building a computer for my friend, and I'm going to be trying to get the best bang for the buck system that I can muster, which means I'm going to be subjugated to both Facebook Marketplace and marketplaces like eBay. So join me, see if I don't end up going insane, and also see if you think the computer I built is worth the money I paid. Now for some quick background. This system will be mostly used for gaming and needs to run Elden Ring nightreign well, as this is the game I want to play with my friend. The minimum requirements are at least 12 gigabytes of RAM, a 10th gen i5 or Ryzen 5 5000 series CPU. GPU requirements are either a 1063 gigabyte or RX 584 gigabyte, but personally I'd like to aim for the recommended hardware or higher since those minimum specs are already becoming obsolete. Now, the recommended specs include 16 gigabytes of RAM, an 11th gen i5 or Ryzen 5 5600, and the GPU recs step up to a 1070 or an RX Vega 56. I ended up with a Ryzen 5 5600G, given the performance of this chip, the declining price of motherboards, and that I managed to snag it off of Facebook Marketplace for only $50. The seller wouldn't include the stock fan at this price, but honestly I'd rather have a cheap tower cooler anyways. This was a screaming good deal to start off this build and would dictate the rest of the components that I bought. All of the CPU pins looked good and there was only a small amount of thermal paste on the bottom that I easily cleaned off with a small pin. For RAM, I picked up a 16GB dual channel 2400MHz DDR4 G-Skill Ripjaws kit. I would have preferred slightly faster RAM, but I can't complain since this only cost me $15 on my local Facebook Marketplace. For storage, I didn't find any spectacular deals, so I ended up with this Gen 3 Patriot 512GB M.2 SSD for $32 off of Amazon. Luckily though, the packaging confirmed that it was compatible with Windows, because I was sweating wondering if this blank drive could store data. For my CPU cooler, I picked up the Thermalright Assassin X120 for about $18 on Amazon. The performance this cooler offers for its low price is truly unmatched in my opinion. I picked up this Marvel 852 case on Amazon for the build. It was an open box deal, so it only cost me about $33. This case should suffice, but the metal feels light and cheap. The front has fairly restricted ventilation, and the case seems kind of dated, only offering up to USB 3.0. Now, it does come with 2 internal fans, and if airflow isn't great, I probably could just drill holes in the cheap front panel. I couldn't find any good local deals on a motherboard at that time, so I ended up with this ASRock A320M AC board off of eBay for $55. I know this isn't the greatest motherboard, but I bought this one because it was the cheapest I could find at the time that both had Wi-Fi and could support my 5600G CPU. But when it arrived, it was filthy, missing the CPU cooler mount, the I/O shield, the Wi-Fi antennas, had things bent, and had a random stick of RAM inserted into it. None of which was disclosed by the seller. Now let's talk graphics card. Like I said, I was trying to keep this build as cheap as possible, and I personally own a PowerColor Red Devil RX 588GB that I was planning to use in this build. It currently is in use in someone else's home PC, and I've been meaning to remove it for a while. But all of my plans changed when I found this RTX 2070 Super on Facebook Marketplace, and I managed to snag it for only $120. This was probably the best deal of the entire build, as these cards often go for $180 to $200 on eBay, and the performance will be a significant uplift over the aging RX 580. So you may have noticed I haven't mentioned a power supply yet. So what am I going to do about that? Well, my friend already has an aging PC that I built for him a while ago. I plan on just reusing that power supply out of the system, which definitely helps with our current budget. Bet you weren't expecting that Uno reverse card. Now, if I did need to buy one, I had found an older 750 watt EVGA model on Marketplace for $25, so just keep that number in mind for when I run through the whole price of this system later. Trying to make good out of a bad situation with my motherboard, I left the RAM stick in and placed my Ryzen CPU in the board before I cleaned it to prevent dust spread to those slots. Now, to begin the build, I had to order a CPU cooler mount off of eBay, which ran me about $5. Let's talk about our CPU while I get this build started. The Ryzen 5 5600G, which released in 2021, is a 5th gen Ryzen CPU built on the 7nm process size on the AM4 socket. This CPU has 6 cores with 12 threads at a base frequency of 3.9 GHz with turbo up to 4.4 GHz. The CPU has a TDP of 65 watts and features 16 MB of L3 cache. Overall, this CPU should still handle gaming well and be fantastic for a budget experience. Because I didn't have a spare power supply at the time, I did what I refer to as a computer transplant and removed one of my other PCs from its case and transplanted this one in to test to make sure that it works. For the test, I'll be using the onboard Vega graphics to avoid any potential errors with a discrete GPU. Now, mind you, all of these components are currently untested by me, so this is a complete gamble. Now for my initial test. I was praying to see a boot screen, but alas, I was greeted with nothing but the foreshadowing black screen of depression and extra money spending. Now I know what you're gonna say watching this video. Hey jabroni, that's a 300 series motherboard. It needs a BIOS update to work with the 5000 series Ryzen chip. But hold your horses. I checked with the eBay seller if the BIOS was updated before I purchased it. Surely, though, the man who sent me a filthy motherboard with none of the other components wouldn't have lied to me. So, assuming it wasn't the motherboard, I tried to dig deep and have a brain blast moment to figure this out, which included switching out every RAM stick one at a time in each slot and reseating the CPU as well. None of which worked at all. This led me to one conclusion. It was likely the motherboard, since the CPU was being used before I bought it, and all 3 RAM sticks being faulty is extremely unlikely. So I reached out to the seller again, and when they responded, it let me know they had no idea what they were talking about, and I really should have just opened a case with eBay given the forgotten components and blatant misinformation. But I decided I wanted to prove this person wrong. Which led me to purchasing this little guy for $25, which, mind you, would have covered the power supply I mentioned earlier. This is a Ryzen 3 Pro 2200G, a 2nd gen Ryzen CPU which should be compatible with this motherboard and allow me to update the BIOS, assuming that was the issue. Once I got the new CPU seated, thermal paste replaced, and the fan mounted again, it was time to fact check myself and see if I had correctly predicted the BIOS being out of date, or if I wasted $25 on a geriatric 4-core CPU. Mind you, I was also using the RAM stick that came with this motherboard. The initial pause definitely had me nervous, but then it happened. Every computer builder's sigh of relief. The boot screen. Once into the BIOS, it could be seen that we had an 8GB stick of RAM at 2666 MHz, and we were running on BIOS version 4.0, which if we check the motherboard website, it confirms all of my suspicions. The BIOS was last updated in the middle of the COVID pandemic. Now, in an attempt to make sure my dual channel kit of RAM was working, I switched out the old stick of RAM, which only could mean one thing. So I've run into another issue. You can see here we're booted this time, and I have in my drive, but I only have in one stick of RAM as well. I had to remove this other stick to get the motherboard to post. It didn't post earlier when I had both in, so I'm going to try to reseat it, see if that fixes it, or if there's a different issue. You know, if we have a bad stick of RAM, or if there's something wrong with this motherboard. In which case, if there is something wrong with this motherboard, I'm absolutely going to send it back to the person I bought it off on eBay because they have been a nightmare to deal with. After beating my head off a wall for about half an hour, I reseated the CMOS battery and it fixed the entire problem. Probably should have done that sooner. Jumping into the XMP settings, I was able to get the RAM to run at its rated 2400 MHz speed, so all issues seemed to be in the clear. Now it was just time to update the BIOS. Looking at the BIOS update list once again, the motherboard presented a unique issue. I couldn't just update to the latest stable BIOS, I needed to update to version 7.00 first, then use that as a bridge to update to the latest stable version 7.4, which meant I had to update the BIOS twice. And there's only one thing more nerve-wracking than updating a BIOS once, and that is updating a BIOS twice. So in went the USB stick for the first update. The update progress began, and with a little movie magic here, you can see we successfully updated to BIOS version 7.00. With the second USB installed, it was time for update number 2. This update will take us to BIOS version 7.4, which includes the necessary update from 7.2 for Ryzen 5000 series CPUs to work. As you can see here, there was a successful installation to 7.4, and theoretically our Ryzen 5600G should be functional now. So now all that was left was to get the old Ryzen 3 CPU out and put our Ryzen 5 5600G in. Take note that I had placed in the RTX 2070 Super because I thought I was in the clear and everything was going to work now. But after everything that has happened up to this point, I should not have made that assumption. So aside from the fact that I forgot to plug in an HDMI, after I plugged one in I still wasn't getting a signal output, and the fans ramping up every couple seconds was an indicator something was going wrong. I forgot to record myself taking out the GPU, so pretend that's what's going on here. Look, it's out now, so I can plug into the onboard graphics. On the next startup, the onboard graphics immediately put out a signal indicating the FTPM needed reset due to the CPU change. After resetting the FTPM, I set the RAM back to its overclock speed and reseated the RTX 2070 Super. Really all that was left to do now was install Windows, our drivers, and our games on Steam. For the sake of time, I'm going to jump past that install process and we're going to get right into the gaming performance. In Rocket League, I'm running 1440p high quality settings with no light shafts or motion blur. The frame rate maintained mostly around 250 FPS, but you can see it clearly fluctuated between 200 to over 300 FPS. I never witnessed the frame rate even touch the 100 range, so overall this was a great experience, but it is no surprise that a PC this capable should be absolutely able to manhandle Rocket League. With that being said, let's move into something a little more CPU demanding, Counter-Strike 2. For CS2, I'm going to be running at 1440p with mostly high settings. No surprise here, but Counter-Strike was another fantastic experience for this PC. The game ran well in the 130 to 150 FPS range most of the time. Yes, you could play with some settings and get the frame rate higher, but honestly the game looked and felt fine, without any hitches or stuttering. This definitely is enough to have a competitive experience. Well, that is if you're not trying to play through the capture card output with no sound and sitting far enough away from the monitor that you can't see your crosshair, like I was trying to do. Kicking up the intensity once again, I'm jumping into Elden Ring this time, which should give a pretty good indicator of how this computer will run nightreign for my friend. I will be running at 1440p, all high settings except motion blur off. Of note, Elden Ring and Elden Ring nightreign are capped at 60 FPS, so really I'm just looking for a consistent 60 FPS in-game. And honestly, that's what we see here. This game runs at a consistent 60 FPS the entire time. I tried to get more action on the screen to make the frame rate dip, but even with the fight and explosions, the system held strong and never dipped. Honestly, this is exactly what I was looking for, and it should give my friend a better playing experience, and hopefully he enjoys this PC because of it. Once again, moving up the intensity ladder, I will be playing Cyberpunk 2077. I will be playing this game at 1440p with ray tracing turned off, DLSS enabled, motion blur off, crowd density set to low, and a mix of high and ultra settings. In the city, this game ran in the mid 60 FPS range, moving closer to 70 FPS from time to time. The game was smooth and I felt no major stutters when playing. Driving outside the city increased the frame rate into the 70s, and overall I would say this was a playable experience. Settings definitely could be adjusted to target a higher FPS though, if wanted. But now it's time for our most difficult game to tackle, our Unreal Engine 5 behemoth, Oblivion Remastered. For this game, I will be playing at 1440p with ray tracing and motion blur off, most of the settings at medium, and DLSS set to balanced. Honestly, this game was running great, sitting right around 60 FPS with dips from time to time around 50. Once again, the settings could be adjusted to target a higher frame rate, but honestly I can't complain given the price of this computer. So let's break down our total cost. Our CPU was $50, GPU was $120, motherboard $55, SSD $32, CPU mount and cooler $23, and our case was $33. Now, I know I didn't buy a power supply, but I ended up spending the same amount on a CPU to update the BIOS of our motherboard, so I'm going to include that price anyways, so I'm going to say power supply $25, which led us to a total of $338. Now, while this is not the flashiest computer, this is an insane system for sub $350 in my opinion. My biggest complaint with this system is I wish I had gotten 32 gigabytes of faster RAM, but hey, that is always upgradable in the future. So let me know if you think I did a good job with this PC, if you think my friend will like it, or if you think there was a different route you would have taken when building it. If you've made it this far in the video, I want to give a huge shout out for supporting me. If you like this video, leave a thumbs up. I have more content planned, so consider subscribing or watching one of my previous videos. Thank you once again, and I will see you in the next one.